Are all worldviews equal? Let's find out as we analyze the 7 major worldviews. For each, we're going to evaluate them using 3 criteria. Number 1, is it logically consistent? Does it avoid self-contradiction? Number 2, is it empirically adequate? Does it match with what we can actually see in reality? And number 3, is it existentially relevant? Does it really address and speak to the human condition and experience? Remember these criteria as we go through each of these worldviews. Feel free to comment on each worldview as we go along down below. Atheism denies any divine being or God. Now, is atheism logically consistent? According to atheism, because there is no outside transcendent moral authority, there can be no foundation for absolute truth. Thus, atheism posits that there is no such thing as absolute truth, but that is an absolute statement denying absolute truth, which is a self-contradiction. Is atheism empirically adequate? Atheism struggles with the universe's existence and why this earth is fine-tuned for human life. It often turns to the multiverse theory, which remains speculative and actually lacks empirical evidence. The atheistic materialistic worldview tends to assume that we can scientifically investigate all that exists and that the cosmos is completely explained by circumstances and prior causes. However, many people throughout history have explored thoughts and ideas that encompass the unknowable and have shown that there is much to the human experience that is beyond empirical evaluation. Is atheism existentially relevant? Without a divine moral source, atheism can lead to moral relativism, making it challenging to define objective moral values. You know, out of all of the 7 major worldviews, atheism is the only one that denies the existence of God. As such, the most glaring issue is the problem of existential relevance. Yes, atheism fails on other fronts. Moral relativism, failure to explain our current reality, yes. But where atheism, in my opinion, spectacularly fails is on the front of existentialism. Without God, man faces a considerable problem. Life actually becomes meaningless. There is no purpose to exist. As humans, we naturally seek meaning. Atheism ultimately leads to despair. Atheists cannot live consistently within their worldview, as humans naturally affirm value. Without belief in God, people make irrational leaps to establish purpose in life, which are impossible within this atheistic framework. If you subscribe to this worldview, please leave your comments in the section below if there's something that I haven't seen or mentioned. If you ask me, is atheism a valid worldview? I would say I do not think so. Pantheism equates everything with divinity, seeing God as identical with the universe. Is pantheism logically consistent? Pantheism's view that everything is divine leads to a problem of self-refutation because it eliminates meaningful distinctions between good and evil, truth and falsehood. Because of this, pantheism cannot provide a coherent moral framework or a framework to establish what is truth. Because all is divine, it blurs the lines between these distinctions. And that thus renders it internally inconsistent. Absolute pantheism, which claims there is only one being God, runs into trouble when considering the process of enlightenment. If God is the unchanging absolute, and humans must change to realize they are God, then how can they be God? If individuals are merely modes or manifestations of God, why are they unaware of this? How could this metaphysical amnesia arise and dominate the human experience? This raises concerns about the reliability of the pantheist's claim to be conscious of the ultimate reality as one. Pantheists also claim that God is intellectually unknowable, which presents a logical dilemma. The statement isn't very sensible if it cannot be understood intellectually. If understood, it refutes its claim that nothing can be known about God intellectually. Is pantheism empirically adequate? According to pantheism, the apparent duality of good and evil is part of how humans perceive the world. However, from the perspective of the divine or ultimate reality, such distinctions are transcended. Everything, including good and evil, is part of the harmonious whole of existence. By claiming that good and evil are illusions, pantheism contradicts our experience that good and evil exist as accurate and opposing forces. Is pantheism existentially relevant? With no moral distinctions, pantheism doesn't offer us a meaningful framework for life. If you ask me, is pantheism a valid worldview? I would say no. It's not logically consistent, it fails to be existentially relevant, and it doesn't adequately distinguish between good and evil. Now, let's talk about panentheism. Strong panentheism sees God as both within and beyond the universe, yet transcendent. Is panentheism logically consistent? The idea of a bipolar God, one who is both finite and infinite, leads to contradictions. Strong panentheism actually holds that God has two poles, one concrete and one abstract. Concrete pole is finite, temporal, and changing, while the abstract pole is infinite, eternal, and immutable. This leads to the logical impossible situation of a being that is both finite and infinite simultaneously. Is panentheism empirically adequate? Like pantheism, without absolute standards, morality becomes relative, making it impossible to find a stable moral compass. Is panentheism existentially relevant? Panentheism often claims that doctrines are not true or false, but are judged by their usefulness in helping people achieve unity with the cosmos. In this view, a lie or a myth could be useful, raising significant concerns about a framework for determining knowledge and truth. If you ask me, is panentheism a valid worldview? I would say no. It doesn't hold up. It's logically incoherent, and it lacks a clear moral foundation. Let's talk about deism. Deism is dependent on Christian theism for what it affirms or what it denies for its particular character. Deism actually grew out of a rejection of certain Christian tenets. The most significant change was the rejection of a personal character of God. God went from an individual being who interacts with his creation to a distant force who does not. This raises questions like why a personal God would create intelligent beings who can communicate and then never speak to them. Deism ultimately becomes a halfway point between theism and atheism because a silent God might as well not exist. Is deism logically consistent? Deists reject miracles, which is seen as incompatible with their acceptance of creation. If God created the universe from nothing, he could perform miracles such as a parting of a sea or multiplying loaves and fishes or a virgin birth, even a resurrection. These would be nothing, insignificant compared to the miracle of creation. Is deism empirically adequate? Deism struggles to account for miracles, answered prayers, and moral guidance, which are real and relevant experiences for many people around the world today. David Hume, a famous deist, argued that miracles are impossible because no one has ever seen one. But this argument is circular because it assumes that miracles have never happened. Miracles, including the resurrection of Jesus, or I should say especially the resurrection of Jesus, have evidence. And many theists say there is strong evidence supporting other miracles as well. Is deism existentially relevant? Deism's distant, uninvolved God does little for personal morality or justice. It relies on an intuitive sense of morality within human nature. But this raises concerns because across the diverse landscape of cultures and history, there's a widely different interpretation on what morality is. This eventually breaks down and results in a position where good and evil are indistinguishable. Is deism a valid worldview? To me, no. Deism fails to satisfy the criteria of empirical adequacy and existential relevance. Let's talk about finite godism. The principle of causality states that every finite being has a cause. So a finite God also needs a cause. This would mean that the finite God is not the ultimate God. Instead, the being that caused the finite God to exist is the ultimate God. Another way to state this is that finite beings are contingent beings. A contingent being is a being that could not exist. A necessary being is a being that must exist. If God is a contingent being, it would be possible for nothing to exist. However, something does exist. Therefore, God cannot be contingent. A necessary being cannot be limited by anything. However, a finite God is limited, so it cannot be a necessary being. Ultimately, a finite contingent being could not be the creator and would need a creator. Is finite Godism logically consistent? Finite Godism claims that God cannot destroy all evil. Either God is limited by his nature, or something external to God limits God. If God is limited by something eternal, uncreated, and necessary, then this being would be the true God, not the finite God. However, if God is necessary and uncreated, God could destroy anything created and contingent, meaning that the finite God is all-powerful. Is finite Godism empirically adequate? If God is not infinitely powerful, but is still more potent than any other being, then it seems that God still could have prevented great evil, such as Hitler or Stalin or 9/11 or even natural disasters. If God cannot prevent these evils, he is not worthy of the title God. A finite God is no God at all, so people should choose to believe in either an infinite God or no God at all. Is finite Godism existentially relevant? Finite Godism says, God is limited in power but perfect in goodness. However, it is unclear why God would be limited in power but not goodness. An all-powerful but not wholly good God could also explain the presence of evil in the universe. Is finite Godism a valid worldview? If you asked me, I would say no. It fails all three criteria, making it an insufficient basis for a worldview. Polytheism suggests multiple gods with various roles. Is polytheism logically consistent? If there are many gods, then there may be many standards of goodness. This makes it difficult to determine which God is the ultimate standard of goodness and which God people should obey and worship. If no God is the ultimate standard of goodness, then the ultimate standard must be something separate from and above the gods. This would make the ultimate standard the true supreme being, meaning that polytheism is untrue. Is polytheism empirically adequate? Polytheistic worldviews generally believe that the gods are a part of the universe, so that they couldn't have created it. Thus, polytheism has yet to adequately answer the question of where the universe came from and why it has the laws that it has. Is polytheism existentially relevant? It's challenging to derive a coherent ethical framework without a single authority. A single absolute God is the only way to have a single ultimate standard of goodness. If no God is the ultimate standard, then that standard, being higher than the gods, would be the supreme being. Is polytheism a valid worldview? If you ask me, I would say no. It fails to provide a unified source of truth and lacks existential coherence. Different forms exist. Monotheism claims one all-powerful transcendent God. Because there are many variations of monotheism, we are dedicating a separate video just to this topic. I ask you to subscribe and like this video because you'll be notified of when we release that video, and we hope you'll join us for that. For now, which worldview provides the most compelling framework to you? Please comment your thoughts in the section below, and if you enjoy this analysis, please like and subscribe for more episodes. I'm I/B, and I look forward to seeing you next time.